You may or may not know that I've got a fondness for vintage cookbooks, and what I've got today is not so much cookbooks as ephemera. I've got Beat the Clock with Stork from the Stork Cookery service, and McDougall's Super Sifted Cookery by Janet Johnston. So these are two flimsy little pamphlets, essentially. One from Stork, which it was a brand of margarine. It is still a brand of baking fat. It typically isn't called margarine these days for various definition and aesthetic reasons. It's a bit of a weird terminology, minefield. Anyway, so Stork is a fat alternative to butter. McDougall's is a brand of flour. So we're going to have a look through these today. I think I will try to pick out something from one or both of them, and we'll try making it. So starting with the Beat the Clock with Stork. Now, there might be some dated language in here, so anyway, the busy housewife of today with a family to feed and often an outside job as well needs recipes that are simple and quick. The Stork Cookery service is often asked for such recipes, so here is a selection both savoury and sweet. Some recipes are quick to make and serve, others are simple to make but require longer cooking, so can be made one day and heated up or finished off the next. There is something here for every occasion, from a main dish for a special dinner to a chocolate cake to please the children. We're always ready to help, so if you don't find here the recipe you want, or if you have any cookery query, or wish to book a demonstration for your organisation, do get in touch with us. The Stork Cookery Service. So yeah, probably as a promotional thing, Stork ran a cookery advice service. And obviously I imagine a lot of their advice would be use our products. Anyway, let's have a quick look through here then. So, meals in a moment. So there's a recipe here for beef burgers, which looks like, so it is just minced beef, breadcrumbs, onion, mixed herbs, salt and pepper, an egg, and some crushed cornflakes, presumably as a binder. Oh no, it was like a crispy coating, so the crushed cornflakes go on the outside, and then fried in Stork margarine. Sweet corn soup. This is a sweet corn and tomato soup. So it's a tin of sweet corn and a tin of tomato juice, and garlic bread made with Stork and garlic in a small French loaf. Fried chicken, deviled sausages on toast. That sounds quite nice. At least the name of it does. So what have we got here? So skinless sausages, bacon, onion, tomatoes, curry powder, mustard, tomato ketchup, chutney, salt and pepper, cayenne pepper. Sounds like an interesting recipe. So this book is from... This was published, when was this published? It doesn't say, but I'm guessing this must have been the 50s, 60s. Grilled gammon and pineapple rings. Pre-cooked pastry case, so just a recipe for a pastry case. Cheese, tomato, and then various things you could fill that pastry case with. So cheese, tomato, and egg pie, so that's what I would call a quiche. Oh, is it? No, it's not. Because it's hard-boiled eggs, and it's, yeah, so okay, it's an egg and tomato pie with, I think, cheese on top. Oh, a cheese sauce. So it's got a, yes, it's a, okay, so it's eggs and tomatoes in a cheese, in a Mornay type of sauce. Coffee meringue pie. Oh, I thought there might be more things to go in this pastry case than just those two. Anyway, scone vol au vents, or patties. Nutty omelette. So a walnut omelette, that's an interesting one. Oh, and some variations here. Banana omelette, jam omelette, fruit salad omelette. Pastries for parties, a gala ring. So that's a recipe for choux pastry. Choux pastry is quite a tricky thing to do, actually. So interesting that it's in, you know, that they've covered that in one of these books that's ostensibly teaching you how to cook. So yeah, to make the gala ring. And then some variations, curry puffs on, so like choux pastry, but curry in it. Anchovy puffs. Yeah, I'm going to say this must be 60s because anchovies and curry. Anyway, rich short pastry, so just a recipe for pastry, and then something to put in it. Tartlet cases, shortbread layers. See, now shortbread I think probably should be made with butter. I think making that with Stork margarine, it's just not going to be as nice as shortbread made with butter. We're halfway through the book. cheese biscuits. So these are, let's have a look, cheese, and they've got cheese and mustard and cayenne pepper. Cheese and mustard and cayenne pepper as flavour ingredients in this particular era, which I'm taking to be the 60s, was a big thing for party type foods. Cocktail biscuits, cheese butterfly biscuits, decorated cheese biscuits, and then we're on to a delightful black and white picture of chocolate fruity cake, Chelsea horseshoe, and shortbread layers, and gala ring. So that's the gala ring. Those are shortbread layers. I mean, they do look quite nice, but like I say, I think I would make the shortbread with butter, really. Chocolate fruity cake and Chelsea horseshoe. No, that must be Chelsea horseshoe. That must be gala ring. A recipe for curry sauce. So that's margarine, curry powder, onion, apple, sultanas, treacle, chutney, and stock. How much curry powder? Half an ounce of curry powder, which is 1 level tablespoon. Okay. Chocolate and orange sauce, tomato relish, quick tomato sauce. Spreads, sweet and savoury, Genoa cake. Chelsea horseshoe. So this is a pastry filled with dried fruit, so sultanas, currants, spices, sugar and lemon. So a bit like a mincemeat in the middle, and then a pastry roll, and then bent into a horseshoe shape. Everyday cake. Vanilla cookie roll, spicy cookie or coconut cookie. Gingerbread, chocolate fruity cake. This one sounded interesting, just so this has got cocoa, hot water, margarine, caster sugar. It's only got 2 ounces of sultanas in it, so it's a chocolate cake with a few raisins or sultanas in it. I thought that might be more interesting than that. Date loaf, fudgy icing, and that's it. So, if I was going to make something from this book, what would it be? I mean, nutty omelette sounds weird, but I don't necessarily just want to cook something weird. I think deviled sausages on toast sounds interesting, so I think if we're going to do something from this book, it may well be deviled sausages on toast. So that's that book anyway, Beat the Clock with Stork from the Stork Cookery service. Now we're on to McDougall's Super Sifted Cookery by Janet Johnston. So is there some waffle about this one, about what the aim of the book is? I think it's always a good idea to explain why one recommends one particular product or method rather than another. The reason why I place such emphasis on the use of super sifted flour in this book is because super sifted flour has been sieved more than 100 times before it reaches you. This makes it lighter, finer, easier to use. You are more certain than ever of good results, of even rising, even texture. I think you will really see a difference in cakes, pastries and puddings made from these recipes and using McDougall's super sifted flour. Anyway, give it a try and judge for yourself. Janet Johnston. I don't know who Janet Johnston is actually. Maybe Janet Johnston was a well-known cook in those days. When was this book published? We don't know. What about your friends? Over 20 million copies of the previous 24 editions of McDougall's cookery book have been sent out all over the world, and every day Janet Johnston receives letters from housewives telling her that it has been their constant standby over the years. If any of your friends would like a copy of this new super sifted cookery book, suggest that they write to Janet Johnston, including 3p in stamps, at McDougall's Limited, Wheatsheaf Mills, London E14. Be interesting to send, if they're still there, it'd be interesting to send them that now and just say, I heard you've got this book. Yeah, I don't know who Janet Johnston is. I wonder if Janet Johnston is not a real person. Coming at this off the top of my head, I could have done the research and so on, but I don't know. So in between now and when we do the cooking, I will do a bit of research and find out if this was a real person. It might not be. Sometimes these brands invented a character, an uncontroversial and completely controllable character to represent their brand. So general hints that can make all the difference to final results. Flour is best stored in the bag in which it was purchased, on a dry, cool, airy shelf, not in a bin or tin. Never mix freshly bought flour with old stock. This brand of flour, super sifted, so that was their selling point. Their unique selling point was that they'd sieved it lots before it got to you. I don't know how much of a difference that makes nowadays, because flour is generally not clumpy or anything like that. But back in the day when this was published, which, as I say, I don't know when that actually is, sifting flour used to be more of a thing than it is now. It used to be the case that you'd buy flour and you would have to sift it when you cooked, with it, and you would always find some little lumps and clumps and bits and bobs in there. Anyway, this one's got methods of cake making. So this talks about rubbing in. So rubbing in, creaming. So back before food mixers were ubiquitous, when you made a cake, you'd have to cream the fat with the sugar first, then add the eggs, then add the flour, because it made it just possible to mix things without it all just becoming an unmanageable clump. Now that we've got electric food mixers and they're everywhere, this is not so much of a thing. You can get all-in-one cake mixes that just work. Anyway, here are the recipes. So I'm going to go a bit quicker through these because there's more of them. So a quick loaf. So this is just a bread loaf. It's just flour, salt, water. It is self-raising flour. So this is basically soda bread, but only using the leavening that's already in the flour. French twist, date and walnut loaf, bun loaf, scones, girdle scones, drop scones, treacle scones, cheese scones, shortbread, rich chocolate biscuits, ginger snaps, jumbles. Now my mum used to make chocolate and raisin jumbles. I just thought that was a name that she'd made up, but jumbles, there you go. So jumbles, they are like cookies, like a modern, chocolate chip cookie. My mum used to make them with chocolate and raisins in them, and actually she would make hers with half lard and half butter. Coffee kisses, Shrewsbury biscuits, Viennese rosettes, chocolate cakes, mushrooms, but not actually mushrooms. These are cakes in the shape of mushrooms. So you cut out the centres with an apple core, fill with vanilla cream and replace the stalks. Butterflies, almond cakes, coconut cakes, quick Chelsea buns. So Chelsea buns a lot like a cinnamon roll. So it's a sheet, you make your dough, you roll it out into a sheet, you put raisins and mixed fruit and sugar and spices over the top of it, and then you roll it up and slice it and bake it as buns. Madeleines, queen cakes, rock cakes, caramel cakes. Is this all going to be cakes, or have we got savoury recipes in here as well? So here's a tip about lining the cake tin. I mean, actually, when I line a cake tin, I don't bother to do that bit on the bottom there. I just put a lining around the side and put a circle in the bottom. It's good enough. Anyway, gingerbread, 1 egg sandwich. So that's not a sandwich, that's a 1 egg sandwich sponge cake. So it's a cake recipe that only uses 1 egg. There was a one like that in the Stork book as well. Mushroom cake. It's shaped like a mushroom. It doesn't contain mushrooms. Coffee cake, cherry cake, Battenberg cake, date and walnut cake, almond cake, cut and come again cake. I've heard that name a fair bit, cut and come again cake. I think that's just meant to indicate that it's Moorish. And interestingly, that all of the temperatures in here are given in Fahrenheit or regular, which is gas mark. Rich dark cake, rich chocolate cake, Dundee cake, fruit cake, coffee walnut cake, Madeira cake, special chocolate cake. More cakes, cakes. I mean, it's a flour thing, so it's going to be mostly cakes. Custard tarts. Oh, do you know what? I love a custard tart. It might be that we make this. It's a very simple recipe, but I do love a custard tart. Bacon and tomato flan, rich Bakewell tart, cream horns, rough puff pastry trimmings folded and rolled as directed. So let's just have a look at their recipe for rough puff, because the fat they use here is firm butter or margarine, because traditionally cream horns, so like a pastry cone filled with flavoured cream, the puff pastry for traditional cream horns is made with lard. I discovered that when I was doing the lardy cake recipe video. Almond slices, saucer pies. Oh, here's one where somebody's annotated. So what do these annotations mean? It looks like they've doubled it, actually. Yeah, they've doubled the recipe. No, they've actually, okay. So they've doubled most things, but that was 1.5 gills of milk, and they've put 3/4. 1.5 gills is 3/4 of a pint. That's interesting. But everything else, they seem to have doubled. Interesting. We'll never know, because I don't know the owner of this book. I picked these up in, I think, a second-hand shop somewhere, or an antiques market. I can't remember where I got them. They've been on my shelf for a little while, meaning to make this video. But yeah, somebody's modified this recipe. but they haven't doubled the milk. How peculiar. Okay, mixed fruit pudding, jam cap pudding. I've seen that in one of my other books. So that's a suet pudding. And you put jam or honey in the bottom of the dish, and then you put the suet pastry mixture on the top, or suet sponge mixture on the top, cover it up, steam it, and when you turn it out, it's a steamed pudding with a jam hat on. Orange upside down pudding. So there are no doubt some pudding things in here that aren't in my pudding disambiguation. I should probably say, for people from America, the word pudding here in the UK means lots of different things. Here is an incomplete list of the things that pudding may apply to here, usually qualified by another word to tell you what kind of pudding it is. The thing that is called pudding in America is never called pudding here. Anyway, that's it. Mostly cake and pastry recipes there. I will pick something out of here. There is a meat sandwich, minced beef, onion, okay, suet crust pastry, so a bit like a pie. I fancy a savoury recipe. No, I'm going to do a savoury recipe from this book, and I think we'll do a sweet one from this book, but I haven't decided which one yet. So I'm going to go and sit by the fire and read through this in greater detail, and then we go and cook. Okay, so yes, a decision has been arrived at. I'm going to make deviled sausages on toast from the Stork Cookery service book, and I'm going to make jam cap pudding from the McDougall's. I did a little bit of Googling in between that last scene and this one, and it does appear to be the case that Janet Johnston is not a real person. This is a persona invented by McDougall's for the purpose of marketing their products, but also the purpose of running this service. So Janet Johnston is essentially a bit like Betty Crocker in that regard. Not a real person, a persona that they invented to promote their product as a nom de plume for a variety of authors who probably contributed to their cookery books. Other interesting things. So this table of conversions here, oven management chart, has got the really old, this is really old oven temperatures. This is if you had a wood-fired stove or something, and it just goes from very slow, very moderately heated, moderately hot, fairly hot, and very hot. And then this is one I haven't heard of before, main stat lettered control. So that must have been a thing that came before regulo, before numbered controls. These are gas mark here, although that isn't, I don't remember anything going up to gas mark 12. And then Fahrenheit, no Celsius, and there is no date as far as I can see in here. There is no date of printing, but it must have been before 1971 because the prices are all in old money. Telephone number is Telephone East 5050. That's a London telephone number, East 5050. So a 4-digit telephone number just with East. That might help to date it as well. I would say 1960s. I will try and find out, and I'll put some information on screen if I can find out the actual date of publication for these books. But anyway, that's what we're making today. Jam cap pudding, and serve that with custard. But first we're going to have deviled sausages on toast. Okay, we are to make deviled sausages on toast, and here arrayed are the ingredients. Quite a lot of ingredients, really, for something that is just really a snack. Anyway, let's proceed, and this recipe is a little bit confusing, and I'll explain why as I go. The first thing we have to do is chop up some skinless sausages and fry them in Stork in a medium-sized frying pan over a moderate heat, together with the bacon and onion. That's the first thing that's weird about this. If I was frying sausages and bacon, Stork would not be my choice of fat for frying them. I would probably just use the fat from the bacon. This almost feels like a recipe where Stork margarine was just jammed in there for the sake of putting it in this book. We are to chop half a pound of skinless sausages. That's about that many of them. And here's the other weird thing. The book says to cook these over a moderate heat for 5 minutes or until cooked. And these are raw pork sausages. That doesn't really seem like enough time to cook them. So I'm going to cut these into, I think those are about 1/2-inch pieces. Some of those might be nearer 3/4. Now it did occur to me that maybe they were talking about sausages that were already cooked, but the bacon's going in raw. And I think if these had been cooked sausages, the recipe book would have said so. And also I think they probably would have been calling them frankfurters or something. The recipe calls for 2 rashers of bacon. I've used 3 because this is cut quite thin. I have to cut that up into small pieces as well. let's get that lot in the frying pan. The other thing that's perhaps very obvious, but I should mention it anyway, is that the formulation of Stork margarine these days will be nothing like it was when this book was published in the 1950s. In the 1950s, Stork was made from whale oil, and over the years, Stork margarine's been made from a lot of different animal and vegetable oils. But yeah, in the early 1950s, it was whale oil. They did transition to fish oil, which they euphemistically called marine oil, before phasing that out sometime in, I believe, the 1980s. But it's really difficult to research this. The internet is becoming less and less useful for researching this sort of thing. I Googled it, and Google's AI thing gave me 4 different answers that didn't completely agree with each other. And even when you try to drill down into the results, it's showing you some of those articles aren't real either. They're just synthetic articles. It's actually becoming quite difficult to use the internet for researching the history of food. And that's why books like this, which, you know, AI can't get its hands on and change, are going to become, I think, a goldmine. So we want about 1 ounce of Stork margarine in the pan, and we're going to put that over a moderate heat. Now, interestingly, there was then, and there still is now, a distinction between Stork spreadable, they used to call it table margarine, and Stork block for baking. It's probably slightly different formulations. The block one tends to be harder at room temperature, performs a little bit more like butter. This one is a little bit more spreadable. And I think that distinction must have been there back in the 1950s as well, because they've specified in the book table margarine. Right, so these bits of sausage and this bacon is going to go into the pan. And like I say, I would never really dream of cooking sausages and bacon in Stork margarine. It's just not a thing that makes very much sense to me. Anyway, while that's just getting started, I'm just going to chop the onion finely, because that goes in as well. Alright, so 1 finely chopped medium-sized onion goes in as well. And yeah, the book says to cook this for 5 minutes, but I mean, the sausages are starting to brown a little bit, but 5 minutes is nowhere near going to be enough to even cook these pork sausages, let alone brown them. I'm not expecting that the bacon will go crispy, because really crispy bacon, traditionally, not really the way we cook bacon in England. Even streaky bacon. Perhaps a little bit crispy, but not frazzled. It does say until cooked, so I'm going to cook until cooked. I suspect this is going to be more like 15 to 20 minutes. So while that goes on there, look at this go on here. 2 tomatoes, which we are to peel and chop. So peeling them is going to involve immersing them in boiling water for a minute or 2. That will very quickly cook the outside layer just underneath the skin, and the skin will just slip off. Right, that should be long enough. You should find now, if I just give that a little slit across there, that skin will just slip off. It is interesting how many recipes from the 1950s and 60s and early 70s call for pretty much the same ingredients. I was just talking to Jenny about this, about how many different things in the book call for mustard and cayenne pepper and curry powder and peeled tomatoes. That was, I suppose, like I said earlier, when this book was published, rationing had only just finished. People were having to learn to cook again, and even though rationing was over, more or less over, scarcity was still a thing. And also, people were accustomed to certain ingredients that had been available. It was things like mustard, cayenne pepper, anchovies. Certain things were familiar and people knew that they had good flavour. Anyway, that's my tomatoes. The recipe also calls for chutney, and it is specifically talking about English chutney, I'm certain. Not mango chutney, and that's also not any kind of Indian chutney. It's an Indian inspired. Chutney is a term that Britain acquired from India, but an English chutney is not the same as an Indian chutney. Specifically, they're talking about something a bit like Branston. This is my shrimp cottage pickle. This is homemade, so we're going to use this. Sausages, bacon and onions, I'm happy that those are cooked. Like I say, they're not going to be completely crispy, but the onions have got a little bit of caramelisation on them. The bacon's got some little crispy edges, but it's not completely frazzled. The sausages will be cooked throughout. Now the other ingredients can go in. My 2 chopped tomatoes. 2 level teaspoons of curry powder. I'm using this curry powder I brought back from Spain because this is very much like old school British curry powder. To me, the flavour profile on this is very, very similar to the curry powder we used to get back in the 70s and 80s, which I'm assuming is similar to the ones in the 50s. Next, 1 level teaspoon of made mustard. So it's talking about made up mustard rather than mustard powder. So a level teaspoonful of that, which is about that much. 2 teaspoons of tomato ketchup. I'm going to eyeball it. Salt and pepper. It doesn't say how much. A pinch of cayenne pepper. That's a pinch. And 1 level tablespoon of chutney, which is about that much. So then we stir all of that together and simmer it for another couple of minutes. I'm going off piste a little bit here, but I'm just going to put a splash of water in there just to help bring all of those ingredients together properly, and then I'll reduce that with a little simmer. Well, I think we're in the right vicinity. Okay, the book calls for this to be served on 4 slices of hot buttered or hot toast spread with Stork margarine, which is what we're doing. I'm only going to do 2 slices. I suspect I'm eating a double serving of a snack here, and so this lot has to be divided up between, well, into quarters. So that's about how much is going to go on a slice. I wonder if I can do this neatly. Okay, that's about half of the mixture on these 2 slices, so that should be served out correctly. Let's just try to dress that a little bit, and then garnish with the chopped parsley. That is, insofar as I'm able to replicate it, devilled sausages on toast from the Beat the Clock with Stork cookbook. Okay, tasting time. Well, let's try a sausage and a bit of sauce first. That's a nice sauce, actually. That's a nice combination of flavours. It works very well. I've got to say that Richmond sausages, not my favourite sausage. The only reason I chose them is because that's the only skinless sausages I could find, and the recipe did call for skinless sausages. I think it would be nicer if those were pieces of chicken breast instead of sausages. It's aromatic, it's piquant, rich and full flavoured sauce. I do think, yeah, anything other than these sausages, perhaps even some chickpeas, would be nicer than these sausages, but that's mainly because I'm just not a fan of these. And I think the reason the recipe calls for skinless sausages is they can be cut up easily into pieces that stay as they are. I could have got sausages with skins and taken them out, but I would have ended up with little meatballs. Nothing especially wrong with that, I suppose. But back in the day, the sausages that had skins on them would probably have been natural hog casings, and so the skins would have been quite unpleasant if they were cut up. They would have been quite stringy. As I say, the flavour combinations are great. The curry, the cayenne pepper, the mustard, the chutney, the tomato, that's a good set of flavours. I think we may do a redemption episode where we make this again, but with something else instead of these sausages, and with butter or ghee instead of Stork. But yeah, no shortage of flavours here, and in amongst all those spices you can't really tell what fat was used here. That may be by design. I suppose what we've got here really is a little bit like German currywurst. So yeah, that's not bad, and I'm glad we picked that recipe from the book. So now we've got to look at the other book and make jam cat pudding. So jam cat pudding. Now I'm going to do this recipe slightly out of order, and it will become apparent why in a moment. It says prepare by method 1, see page 4, and method 1 is rubbing in. Interestingly, it does specify to sift the flour, even though the whole selling point of McDougall's flour was and still is that it's pre-sifted. But anyway, so we want 6 ounces of McDougall's super sifted self-raising flour. Now McDougall's was acquired by Rank, and it was then part of Rank Hovis McDougall, and now it's Premier Foods, I think. There is no guarantee that this flour is the same flour or has the same quality or properties that the McDougall's flour had when that book was printed. But it seems like the right thing to do, to at least use the right brand. So we want 6 ounces, so we'll switch this to ounces and we'll do it using the native measurements. So 6 ounces of flour. Sifting isn't just about removing lumps in flour, it is about separating the grains and aerating it. So I think it can make a difference to cakes. Maybe one day we should do an experiment with sifted versus non-sifted flour, bake 2 otherwise identical cakes and see what the differences come out like. And I want 2 ounces of butter or margarine. It doesn't specify salted butter, and there is a pinch of salt in there, so I'm going to use unsalted. And to stop my butter sticking to the scales, I'm just going to put a bit of that flour back in there and then zero it. So 2 ounces of butter. Not a lot of butter. Bearing in mind that this book was published in the mid-1950s, so only just after the end of rationing in the UK. In fact, it may have just overlapped rationing. I think the last bit of rationing finished in 1954 or something like that. So this book might have already been in print before rationing had ended. Some of the recipes in here are a bit frugal. A pinch of salt, which is maybe that much, and then in goes my fat. So rubbing in consists of, well, I'll just cut this fat up a little bit smaller. Now I have got a tool to do this, and you could do this in a food processor, but since we're going old school with the book, we'll go old school with the method. And it is just a case of pinching the fat like this between your fingers. So sandwiching the fat, a lump of fat in between some flour, squeezing it, and we're making the fat and the flour combine by squishing them together. You can do this with a fork. I think you can probably just push a fork through it and break up the fat into smaller pieces. I remember being taught this method of rubbing in just with the fingertips at school, and my home economics teacher at school rated me as best in the class at rubbing in. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe I got cold hands or something. I think if you've got very warm hands and the butter melts, then you end up with more of a dough. So we're getting somewhere. It is starting to rub in, but I've got a bit further to go first. Cheese scones were the thing I used to enjoy making the most, I think, and that required rubbing in the fat into the flour. So it's interesting, this is a steamed pudding, but it's not a suet pudding. When I was just skimming the book earlier, I did say it was a suet pudding, but it's not. So instead of suet, which is the shredded hard fat from beef usually, this is using butter or margarine. I'm using butter rather than margarine. I think I had enough of margarine in the other recipe. It's getting close now. So we're now at mostly a breadcrumb texture, but with a few lumps still. So I'll just keep going. And all that's happening here is my fingertips are just rubbing the fat into the flour like this. Obviously clean hands, but you know, if you don't have clean hands at the start, you certainly will at the end. Yep, I reckon that will do. So now we add the sugar. Just 1 ounce of sugar. There we go. So the reason why I'm doing this recipe out of order, because it does say to grease a pudding basin first and place the jam or honey in the bottom, except I didn't really know how big of a pudding basin I was going to require for this amount of mixture. I couldn't visualize it because it's ounces. I've been working in metric long enough now that I can't visualize ounces anymore. I have a selection of pudding bowls here. In fact, I think that's a jelly mould, but do you know what? That might be quite good, mightn't it? It is Pyrex, so that is heat proof. It might be quite fun to do it in there, mightn't it? But I think that mix will fit in that size of a bowl. Well, we can test that. Because it's still dry, we can just do a dummy run. Yeah, that's the right size basin for that, isn't it? It's going to rise a little bit in the cooking, but that does seem to be about right. Now I will grease my bowl. I'm just going to do that with my hands. So a little bit of butter, a knob of butter, as recipes would often call for, and I'll just generously smear that around the bowl. Next we require 2 tablespoons of jam. It is going to be purple jam, the best colour. This is my homemade purple jam I made tail end of last year, and I'm going to eyeball 2 tablespoons of jam rather than squeeze it into a tablespoon measure. Next, 5 to 6 tablespoons full of milk, and this I will measure because that's probably fairly critical. So that's my tablespoon measure. 1, 2 and a bit, 3, 4, 5, 6. This looks like it's going to be about right. I think maybe a tiny splash more milk. That looks about right, so that's starting to come together into a single piece of dough now, so that's good. A little bit of flour on my hands just so I don't have to get stuck to this. And then I'll pick up all the dough from the dish, get it in there and press it down. That's a bit smaller than I thought it was going to be. And I can see the jam coming up the side there, which I didn't really want, so let's just see if we can constrain that. Well, there we go. Greaseproof paper. Now the book only says use paper, but I'm going to use paper and foil. And we'll have a double layer. And I will just put a tiny pleat in there. I don't think that's strictly necessary, but that would allow that a little bit of expansion room. I don't think it'll need it because it's got a bit of headspace in there. Then just a single layer of foil over there, like that. And the foil will just help the paper to stay down while I tie it. Now, string would be the right thing to use here, and guess what I haven't got? I have got a piece of wire though, just a bit of garden wire. In a pinch, it will do. So there we go, and then pliers on there to pull that tight. Now a lot of the time with steamed pudding recipes it would say to steam it, but what it actually means is stand it in a pan of hot water and boil it. That is what is commonly meant by steaming in a lot of recipes. This bowl has 3 little feet on it actually to stop it jumping around when it boils in water. However, I am going to steam this in the double steamer. So bring that to the boil and steam it for 45 minutes, being careful that I don't boil the bottom pan dry, of course. Alright, steaming time is done on that, so I'm just going to turn that off. And I'm not going to attempt to move that for the moment, but I can feel the pudding has risen to the top of the foil. So it's risen and taken up the whole of that pudding dish. That's good. I'm just going to let that cool a moment before we try to turn it out. Alright, so the top comes off with no drama, and the pudding is, wow, it's really, really soft. I wonder if I ought to just, no, I'm not going to run a knife around that. I'm going to take it on faith that this is going to work. So flip it over. Well, it's, oh yeah, here we go. It's letting go. Yeah. And so there we go, jam cap pudding. I mean, you're looking at the more photogenic side. Here's the slightly less photogenic side, but let's just pretend that doesn't exist. There we go, jam cap pudding. And it's this wonderfully light, spongy pudding. I'm just making some custard and then we'll have a taste. Okay, let's cut into this and see what it's like inside. This is supposedly serves 6, but I think, well, yeah, maybe. Okay. It feels very, very soft and light. And it's, yeah, it just looks really nice and fluffy and light inside. I mean, it's basically a scone recipe. So that's interesting. Anyway, I'm just going to get Jenny and we'll give this a taste on camera. Do you want custard?
Yes, please.
Mind it's going to be hot. That's nice. What do you think, Jenny? It's interesting because it's not quite a cake. There's no egg in here. It's really a steamed scone.
It's nice.
Good.
Tastes like a scone, actually.
But so light.
Yeah.
So it tastes like a scone. Does that mean we could make a cream tea version of this? Serve it with clotted cream instead of custard? For such a simple recipe, that's really good. A long cooking time, but then I suppose we could have steamed this on top of the wood burner. So Jam Cat Pudding gets the thumbs up from both of us. That was really good. So, conclusions. The products first, I think, actually. So McDougall's flour is still with us after all those years. And actually, you can still get the 35th edition of, I believe it's probably the descendant of this book, from mcdougalls.co.uk. It now costs £5.99. The website doesn't actually say very much about it, so I haven't got a copy to review, so I can't really tell you much about the modern version of that, but I imagine it's probably a pretty sound recipe book. The flour obviously will have changed in formulation. This is now part of Premier Foods. The ownership of this brand has changed over the years. The production facilities have changed over the years. It's still wheat flour. How much could change? It's probably better in terms of its production quality now because modern methods, stainless steel, all those sorts of things. Anyway, Stork margarine, or rather Stork, what is this called? This is called, well, is there a description of what this actually is? Anyway, it doesn't say what it is, it's just Stork. Sometimes you'll find these products marked as spread for baking. You very rarely see the term margarine anymore. And when I've mentioned that in the past, people have said that's because margarine had a very strict definition, and these products don't meet that definition because of its chemical makeup or whatever. I don't know that that's true in the UK. I think in the USA that might be true. I know in the USA there was quite a lot of resistance to margarine from the dairy industry. There probably was here as well, but in the USA, the dairy industry lobbied for margarine to be dyed pink so that it would be obviously different from butter. So anyway, margarine here, I think, as a term, is largely fallen out of use because of its negative connotations. People regarded it as cheap or inferior. Again, possibly as a result of lobbying from the dairy industry, possibly as a result of all sorts of information and misinformation about the composition and the ingredients over the years. Speaking of ingredients, so the ingredients in this now are vegetable oils 70%, which is rapeseed, palm, and sunflower in varying proportions. So Stork is now based on those vegetable oils, including palm oil, which they assure us they are producing sustainably. Whether or not you believe that is a whole different and quite nuanced discussion. The internet's probably not the best place to have a nuanced discussion anyway, Stork is not the same product as it was when this book was published. It would have been whale oil when this was probably first published, and then possibly fish oil while this book was still in publication, and then vegetable oil later. But probably also processed vegetable oil, whereas this is more of a blend of vegetable oils. I think it's relying on the palm oil for solidifying the product and making it butter-like. That's enough about the products. The books are strange in a couple of different ways. I found some oddities in both of them. One thing I do love is this book has obviously been loved and used in a kitchen, and it looks like this was the most popular page. This is the most stained page of the lot, so somebody obviously liked one of the recipes on this page, because this is the one that looks like it's been open the most. But there were odd things in here which I want to talk about. One of them was pigs in blankets. Now, pigs in blankets to me means sausages wrapped up in bacon, and it's a common accompaniment for Christmas dinner. These pigs in blankets are chipolata sausages wrapped in pastry, cheese pastry to be specific. So this cheese pastry, that's not what I expected to find in a British cookbook. And the pastry or dough wrapped pigs in blankets, I've always thought to be an American thing. Researching that a bit further, it seems like the bacon wrapped sausages version of pigs in blankets is a relatively modern thing. And actually, pigs in blankets, if you go back further, would have been oysters wrapped in bacon. And sausages wrapped in bacon were called kilted soldiers. But what was interesting is Swindon piglets. Swindon piglets are sausages wrapped in bacon here with, like a ducelle of mushrooms and tomatoes. and parsley and wrapped in pastry. So that's interesting. Swindon piglets. That was the thing from that book that really stood out as a little bit strange. The thing that stood out as a bit odd in this book is that recipe we chose, deviled sausages on toast, which, like I say, I don't know what this is all about. I don't know if skinless sausages were particularly cheap or something in the day when this was made. It's an odd recipe, odd in its inclusion in the book. Although here we got fried chicken, and it's talking about seasoning the chicken and frying chicken in Stork. And again, not a thing I would really think of doing. In conclusion, interesting little books, fascinating little glimpse into culinary history of the mid-20th century. I shall be looking for some more of these. There are quite a few others of these from other brands of flour and ingredients. I think there's a Biro cookbook. I'm pretty sure my mum had the Biro cookbook. That's another brand of flour. I shall be looking out for some more of those books for future videos because this has been quite a lot of fun and quite interesting to me. I hope it has been to you too. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.